just want to do God's will.
What you're seeking is a blessing from God.
You must expect a miracle.
You have the power of choice.
Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Life Today Live. I'm Randy Robinson. Good to have you guys here. Chat is open. You might want to be a part of this conversation. You're invited to if you're watching us live. If you're watching in the replay, you can always come back at noon Central Time and be a part of the conversation. Today's guest, if you're a business owner, you may be familiar with her. If not, I think you're going to find out some fun and interesting things. And we're going to have a lively conversation. Actually, and we discussed this beforehand, so I'm not dumping on her. But I saw the tagline on her book and on all that she does, and I went, we're going to have to discuss that. I might challenge you a little bit that. So we'll see. Maybe I'll learn something today. Well, that's always a good thing. So today's guest, you may know, is Natalie Franke. She is happily married now, so you can also see Natalie Franke Hayes at times, but she has a book that just dropped yesterday, and it's already hitting some of the charts and doing great. It is called Built to Belong. And we're talking about maybe looking at ways to do business a little differently. And so this is going to be fun. I'm going to learn a lot, so I invite you to stay along for the ride and learn some things too. Natalie, great to have you on Life Today Live.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So the Rising Tide Society is something you've been doing for quite a while now. And you really have helped, obviously, a lot of people, you know. But you got to explain what this is. Why is it different? Why is it helping people?
Yeah, so the Rising Tide Society is a community of creative entrepreneurs from around the world. We have just over 70,000 members in cities in the U.S., Canada, and abroad. And what distinguishes us from so many other business networking groups and business support communities is that we believe in this concept of community over competition, which I know we're going to dive into and talk about today. But this has become a mantra for our community. It is ultimately what led to the creation of this community. I was studying visual studies and at UPenn, and building a photography business on the side, and went full time into that business shortly after graduating, and realized just how cutthroat the competition was in the small business space, especially in these saturated markets. And also simultaneously realized that there was such a gap between business owners that were supporting one another in community, that were fighting for one another, and those that chose to go at it alone. And so Rising Tide is rooted in this idea, the famous quote, "A rising tide lifts all ships," and sort of the ideology that when we fight for the collective, we fight to raise the tide, there is going to be benefits for all. And we've seen that over the last 6 years as we've grown and as we've changed, as we've provided business education and resources, community meetups in hundreds of cities around the world. And so it's been quite a journey, but it ultimately has led to the book and so many incredible relationships along the way.
So, okay, so explain on a sort of a micro level, if you will, what that looks like. So if I have, well, you mentioned photography. My daughter's a photographer. She has a photography business, and she wants to improve it or expand it. So she comes and is a part of Rising Tide. She is building to belong. What does it look like for her?
Yeah, so we have both support on the national level and on the local level. So she could join her local chapter. We have hundreds of chapters in cities all over the world, predominantly in the US and Canada, although there are some in Europe and some in Asia. And she could join her local chapter, get immediately connected with hundreds of other entrepreneurs that are in her space, in her city where she's living. In non-pandemic times, we have meetups every single month in those cities. Unfortunately, we've been doing virtual for the past 18 months, but very, very hopeful that's going to change soon in the future, back to in-person. And she also has access to things like downloadable resource guides. We teach on different business topics every month. All of that content is free for our community. It's provided by experts in the community for the community. So we cover topics like finance, marketing, relationships and networking, you name it, we've covered it. Social media changes every year. I feel like we're covering new social media changes for our small businesses. But support, education, and sort of a grounding locally, especially if she has a geographically based business like a photographer would.
All right. So Why is that not helping her compete in the marketplace? Because you say community over competition, as if competition is a bad thing. Am I reading that right, or what am I? How do I take that?
No, actually, that's the biggest misconception about the concept. So we'll just start there. The idea of community over competition isn't the elimination of competition. We're not saying community without competition, or, competition is this horrible thing. We're actually saying we're going to compete, and we're going to compete fiercely. But we're always going to remember that people still come first. We're going to compete in a way that is healthy. For example, healthy competition occurs on a level playing field with clearly defined boundaries. It honors a shared set of a moral code or a set of values, right? So while I might compete with your daughter for a photography gig or opportunity, I would never do anything like slander her name in front of a client or write a negative review about her business to try to harm her. It would be quite the opposite. It would be, we're both going to show up to pursue that client, give it our best shot, leave it all on the field, so to speak. And then the minute that client decides, I'm going to cheer for her, and I want her to have success, and I want her, to thrive in that business. So community over competition isn't saying that we don't compete. It's acknowledging that we compete, but it's still saying that oftentimes we have to remember to still put people first, to compete in a way that still honors the collective, still respects the contributions of members in our community. And I think an important thing to note as well, and look, this is what I've seen in the past 18 months within the small business world, is that, there are going to be forces at work that are essentially threatening all of us. And 18 months ago, 19 months ago, many of us small business owners, our world stopped when the pandemic started. We weren't allowed to continue working, especially within the wedding and events industry, which makes up a good percentage of Rising Tide's community. And so it was no longer wedding planner against wedding planner, florist against florist, photographer against photographer. It was, how are we going to survive this pandemic? How are we going to move beyond the challenges that we're facing, to lobby for one another, to fight for support in our community, to really rally and share information, like how to reschedule clients and how do we navigate our contracts if things are changing. So community over competition, again, the first breath when people hear it, they go, well, hold on a second. It's not all kumbaya. Like it is, it is fierce and cutthroat, and it's saying we know. And we're still going to choose to be community. We're still going to choose to rally around each other, especially beyond the arena.
I get it now, and I'm on board. And you're definitely right. A lot of churches face the same thing during the pandemic. It's like, we have a come together model. What do we do now? Out of my 4 children, we had 2 pandemic weddings. Who would have planned that? But we did successfully. So I get it. Yeah, it's tough for the small businesses. But, you referenced a moral code. And then you said a few things like not going to slander, going to maintain, rejoice with others when they rejoice, right? That sounds very familiar to me. Where did you get this moral code?
There's this book. It's called the Bible. I'm sure you've read it. No, but I mean, truthfully, look, that really is where a lot of this stems from. I think amidst all, I spent my entire life reading the Bible, learning and digging into my faith. And one of the biggest takeaways I've always had is that, we are created for one another. We are created to do life together. We are meant to live in community. Community is one of the most important foundational aspects of how I was raised, where I have thrived, where I have struggled and been held and carried by my community. And so, it goes back to that. And yes, with having a clear moral code, a set of ethics, values, whatever you want to call it, whatever that is for you, it's critical. It's critical, not just, I think sometimes we forget though, we see these lines start to blur in the world blurs these lines. We see athletes doing performance enhancing drugs to succeed. We see parents bribing coaches to get their kids into college. We see students taking non-prescribed medications to perform better on tests. We see these shifts away from this code of ethics portrayed very much by the world. And I think part of this message too is saying, let's not forget. Let's not forget that we belong to one another, that we must support one another. And that's incredibly important to maintain those morals, especially in the heat of competition, right? Especially when the world is watching. And when it is not.
No doubt. And I love it. Your faith has been tested. You've had some serious things, and you've got upcoming joy very soon. Can you share a little bit about some of what you've been through that has really had to test you, so that your foundation, if it wasn't rock solid, you wouldn't be where you're at today?
Yeah. I mean, look, I would even say, from the perspective of the reason why I feel so rock solid in my faith today is because I've navigated some difficulties in my life in which the Lord has refined me, because it was nowhere near as rock solid in some of these moments as it is today. And so when I was in my early 20s, I was diagnosed with a benign brain tumor, just months away from getting married to my high school sweetheart. And part of this tumor and the diagnosis that came with it was that we were going to face fertility issues, that very likely I wouldn't be able to have biological children. And so navigating that with, at the time, my fiance, and now my husband, we've been together for 15 years, but that was an incredibly terrifying time to be in my early 20s. And for anyone who can think back to that moment, you feel invincible. In your early 20s, you think nothing's ever going to happen to me. I'm healthy, I'm young. And suddenly for me, it was like a light switch being turned off. And so much of my future that I had envisioned in my mind, that I had always, and maybe even taken for granted as a young girl growing up, that this is just how it was going to be, it felt snatched away. And so navigating going through brain surgery 3.5 years ago now, and actually having to recover from that surgery, then, continuing to try to have a family. We have one miracle little toddler that I told Randy, he's downstairs napping. We're hoping he stays. And I'm 31 weeks pregnant today with a miracle baby girl. It's very much, I think it has been a lesson for me. One, that we aren't meant to carry the hardships of our life alone. Yeah. We're meant to lean on the Lord, and we're meant to lean on one another. And in that, the community is really strongest in the struggle. Yeah,
and I'm curious, when you were going through such a difficult time, and even just raising 2 little kids, that's not easy. What did your community do for you?
So it's looked different in every season, but at its greatest, it has looked like home cooked meals when I couldn't, my husband had to care for me after surgery for weeks. Mm-hmm. It looked like praying with me over the phone. We had moved from the East Coast to the West Coast amidst my brain surgery. And so I had lost a lot of the community, very much so in person, that I had here with our family. And so it was just a lot of deep conversations, prayer conversations, holding us and carrying us emotionally through those challenges. On the business side, it looked like for weeks, other entrepreneurs actually coming onto my social media channels and taking them over for me to keep my business running. Oh, wow. Literally getting on Instagram stories saying, hey, today's day 15, Nat's doing great. She's recovering. Today, I'm going to be talking about XYZ, and actually creating content to keep my channels going when I, couldn't get out of bed and was still recovering from brain surgery, and so on and so forth. But the truth being that I think, so often when we say the word community, we think about it in the context of something celebratory, right? Mm-hmm. We think about community, we think kumbaya, we think praise, we think joy, we think, a packed pew of people celebrating and praising the Lord. We don't often think about community as, someone has fallen out of the ship and these are the lifeboats going to save them. We don't think about community as I'm going to reach out my hand and pull you from the icy water. I'm going to make sure that you don't drown. I'm going to carry you when you can't carry yourself. And that's what community has been for me. And not just in business, because it's also been that too. But I think in all aspects of my life.
Yeah. And I love that. We celebrate the American independence and spirit, and I do too. But we can get into a ditch on one side of the road of isolation real fast, and that's not healthy. So I love what you do. I want to show people the book again. We're talking to Natalie Franke. Now, Natalie Franke Hayes. Okay, see, she got her book right there. There's the full screen graphic of it. You can also get some of the resources on her website there at nataliefranke.com. Frank with an E. Franke, we would say, if it's a good German name. Tell people, let's get back a little bit. And by the way, thank you for sharing your personal story. That means a lot. And to know where you come from and the fire that has tried you. But I want to jump in for anybody who may be watching. I got to say a couple of things. I love, one, that you're young and doing your own business. I love that you're a woman doing your own business. I love that. I just love it when people start their own business. We kind of in our country moved towards a little bit of you need to go to the university so you can plug in to be a big part of the big corporation. And I'm fine with that. I've done that. I've worked for a Fortune 500 company before. Got no problem with that. But I think that's led to a little bit of a imbalance when it comes to the entrepreneurial spirit, because innovation, I think, is not just healthy for a country or a community or a person, but I honestly think innovation is a gift from God. And so, how do we make things better? And the godly view would, how do we make things better for our fellow man, right, while providing for ourselves? And that's what I hear and see you doing. Jump into the book or maybe the website and tell people, someone who's thinking, I'm thinking about stepping out and doing my own business. I'm sure just reading your book and going to your website is going to make them go, maybe I can do it. What can they learn from what you've learned?
Yeah, no, I've been an entrepreneur for over a decade. I started when I was 18 years old, and I've built multiple businesses. I've sold businesses. I've worked, and I've also, I took a very traditional path for a little while and went to school, got my degree, and then took this leap into saying, I'm going to give this a shot. I'm really going to try to make entrepreneurship work. So for someone who's considering it in any season of life, at any stage, first, I want to just congratulate you for having the courageous thought of stepping beyond, the structure that is so often communicated as safety, and seeing that there are other routes to earn a living and make an impact. I believe fiercely that whether it's freelance on the side of a corporate job, a lot of people do that as a stepping stone, or going full and wholeheartedly into full-time entrepreneurship, that small businesses and independent freelancers are very much the lifeblood of our communities. I mean, especially small businesses. So my advice to you would be this. First, and this is honestly one of the reasons I wrote the book, don't go at it alone. If you're going to step into small business ownership, know that you might be a solopreneur for a time. You might be the only one taking that leap, but you are not alone. Surround yourself with folks who have done it, who have gone before you. Learn. Always be open to learning and feedback, including critical feedback at all stages. I look back at some of my early work as a photographer, and heck, the first draft of this book is a great example. And without that refinement and that feedback and that support, with people giving me, kind of guidance along the way, never would have gotten to where I am today. So as you step forward, be ready to be humbled, be open to that humbling, and be grateful for that opportunity. And I would say as well, it's not, and everyone's heard the saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. But I like to take it a step further. And I believe to succeed as a small business, it's not what you know. It's not who you know. It is how you make people feel. Whether that's the service you're providing or the product you're delivering or the way in which you step up to support your community, it's how you make people feel. That is your brand. And that is the backbone of your brand. And so that would be my other little bit of advice. So remember that, as you move forward in all things, remember that it's how you make people feel, both in the work you do or the products you provide, the service that you offer, but also as you build community, stepping out into the unknown. Yeah. And then lean into Rising Tide. Lean into Rising. I would say go and check out honeybook.com/rising tide, or search your local Tuesdays Together group. There will be even more in-depth resources for you there. But again, in order to get there, you have to acknowledge you're not going to do it alone.
Yeah. And, the interesting thing about that is, even if you're not you're going to have people that are across the spectrum of businesses. They won't all be in the same sector as you, but you'll learn good common practices. You'll maybe learn what not to do. That's one of the most valuable things you can learn in life, is what not to do. And you learn that from mistakes. So yeah, I totally get that. I'm curious, however, this is not my field of expertise. So correct me if I'm wrong, please. But in the last year and a half, I have seen many states, and varying degrees depending on where you're at, where small businesses were forced to close, while Walmart and Amazon, some of the larger corporations, and I'm not down on any of them, so don't hear it that way, but they continued to do business, and not just do business, but thrive through the pandemic. Seems a little unfair, you know. But what did you see with your groups over the last year and a half, and then what do you maybe see in the next year? Can you forecast it all?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, without getting real fiery on my feelings between the corporate Goliaths and the small business Davids, and just by saying that, you can tell who I'm rooting for oftentimes in these conversations. I think what's happened is a season of immense hardship for small businesses. Depending on what stats you look at, I've seen it all across the board, but roughly there's been some conversation that 30% of America's small business owners have had to close at some point in the pandemic, whether that's permanent or not. I was unable to discern, but I've seen that stat over and over and over again from different folks, including our vice president. And so acknowledging that over the past year and a half, they've endured immense hardship. We are seeing a lot of businesses close their doors. We're seeing a lot of business owners who've been doing this for a very long time, throwing in the towel and saying, I can't continue to operate anymore. But with that, I don't want to paint a picture just of doom and gloom. I think it's important for us to note that we have a say in that anyone watching this right now has the opportunity to vote with your dollars. You have the opportunity to invest back into your small business community. I always say, like, I never want to hear anyone go, oh, darn, that place closed. You know, I really liked that place, but they hadn't been there in a year or two, right? Remembering that, like, we can prevent that from happening by taking action, by getting involved, by supporting small business. And then I also see something on the horizon that excites me. Many are calling it the Great Resignation. We are seeing more people resign from corporate jobs than we have in years. We're seeing records set. April, it was something like 2.7% of the U.S. workforce resigned in April, and they're anticipating larger numbers of resignations continuing throughout the fall. Wow. A lot of folks spent the last year and a half really evaluating their life and what mattered to them. Yeah. A lot of them are going to take a leap. They're going to potentially leave their jobs and go and start small businesses. And I'm hearing that in resounding conversation in my community. So while there has been an immense hardship, there has also been, in a lot of ways, a new door opening for opportunity, potentially unlike ever before, where technology has kind of sped up in the last year and a half. To enable us to work more remotely, to give people more access to small business education. So while I think the battle will always be between the large companies and the underdogs, I also think that the way we work is changing. And I wouldn't be surprised if down the line, if small business and freelance and independent work becomes the future, which is one that really excites me, because I think there's a lot of potential there that's untapped, and a lot of people with incredible impact to make on this world and to serve people in our communities that they have not been able to do because they have been, you know, working in what they thought was the safe path, when there are so many other opportunities that are right for some people that maybe they haven't considered. Sure.
Yeah. I just like to see a balance, you know, and like say a level playing field. Have you ever gone to Amazon and found something you like, found out who made it, and gone to their website and ordered it? Don't answer that question. I have, and I get it. I mean, the pandemic was rough on everybody. You saw movie theater chains closing down, restaurant chains closing down. So I'm not here to beat up on one or the other, but I tend to think as a Christian that, you know, which route you go, and this applies even in the ministry area. Do I go to work for a church or start my own ministry? You know, and obviously the business area. Do I work for a secular company? Do I start my own business? For Christians, my belief is that wherever you're at is your ministry. You know, whether it's at a Fortune 500 where you have to maybe curtail some of your language, you can still walk the gospel every day of the week. You know, what is preach the gospel, and when necessary, use words, right? You can live it out every day. And a lot of it's by doing what you're talking about doing and treating people right and putting people first. But then, you know, whether it's to stay there, to start your own, to whatever, I really think we have to be led by God, because it's not a one size fits all. And if you are led and you're watching, you think you're led, you're wondering, you're praying about it, good, keep doing that, to start your own business, check out what Natalie's got here for you, both in the book and in the website. And I think God can use that information, because gaining knowledge is a part of getting to wisdom. And you're going to need wisdom to start your own business, or to know not to start your own business. But Natalie, when people pick up Built to Belong, the book, or they go to the website, what do you really, at the very core of what you're doing, hoping that they walk away with?
I'm hoping that they walk away feeling empowered to fight back against our culture of competition that is unhealthy. Our culture that tells us they have to be the best and not their best. Because what you're saying, and what I love, is that God has created us to be our best, not to be someone else's version of success, not to chase after what's meant for somebody else, but to understand what is meant for us. And how often do we chase after what we see someone else doing and pursue that? So my hope is when you pick up this book, when you read and you dig deep into the chapters and the lessons throughout it, that you step away feeling empowered, knowing that there is something extraordinary waiting for you and only for you, and you can celebrate others in the pursuit of their success as well, and do life with others, do life in community, and fuel the success of the collective as a result.
I love it. No, I love it. Natalie, thank you for what you're doing. Hit the social media handles for people that want to follow you. Just go follow or subscribe on the social medias. And is there any other place that they should know about podcasts or anything?
No, I would just check out my website, nataliefranke.com. You can go /book if you'd like to learn more about the book, and I'm happy to connect on social.
What are your handles?
At Natalie Franke.
Okay. So it's all Natalie Franke.
Across the board.
Okay.
Yes, everywhere.
Cool. And it's spelled just like on the book, just like in the URL that I threw in the chat for those of you who can see that. And check it out. This is a great resource. God has raised up someone to do something to help others, and get your boat in her ocean so you can all rise. Is that? I don't know. I just let it go.
I see where you're going with it.
I tried. Sometimes you just got to let it go. Okay. Thank you guys for watching, hanging out. If you know anybody that's interested in the business side of things, maybe starting out, you got to share this one with them. Be sure to subscribe to all the Life Today channels at Life Today TV. And come back tomorrow, John A. Cuff. I'm looking forward to that one. So we'll see you again next time here on Life Today Live.